The primary purpose of Uniquely Human, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with each individual or family for specific guidance.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.
Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, clinical scholar, researcher, and consultant on autism and neurodiversity, and a Brooklyn boy raised in the big city.
And I'm Dave. I'm none of those things, and I grew up on a farm in Illinois. But being on the spectrum myself, I have plenty of personal insight to lend.
And this is Uniquely Human, the podcast, a show that illuminates and celebrates autism and neurodiversity. Today on Uniquely Human, the podcast, we have a special guest to talk about some very important issues. And our special guest is Jordyn Montique, who is a speech and language pathologist. So welcome, Jordyn.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
It is our pleasure. So a little bit about you. Jordyn is a speech language pathologist and a trailblazer within the field of speech pathology. She specializes in culturally responsive therapy, child language development, and advocacy. Jordyn's services include therapy and assessment, speaking engagements, providing learning opportunities, consulting, product editing, creating diverse materials, and selling meaningful products and apparel. So we'd love to hear a little bit about your personal and professional journey that led you to where you are today.
Of course. I mean, we all have a story, right?
Yeah.
So I am, as you said, I'm a speech language pathologist. I just, for the first time this year, I'm 100% working for myself as a private practice owner. And I have some school contracts, but there's, a long journey, like you said, to get here. Both my parents are actually special educators. My mom was a special education teacher for over 30 years. And then went back to school and is now a school counselor. But I grew up in her classroom. And so I always say, like, she showed me what it means to be neurodiversity affirming before anybody knew what the term was. She had such high expectations for her kids. They always outperformed what anybody else thought they could do. And they were cool. Like, we were friends. I was friends with all the kids in her class. So I was just really born into the field. I was born into, caring for others and being neurodiversity affirming. And then my dad, he also still teaches. He teaches middle school, the support classrooms for science and math. So he's been in the same boat. But before that, he was a preacher. And before that, he worked in tech. So he's done a lot of different things. But most importantly, I think about him is he's albino. And so he is a Black man who does not look like it, if you don't know. And so I think just from him early on, I learned there's no one way to be something. And so I feel like both of those kind of shaped how I grew up. And then for college, for undergrad, I went to a PWI, which is a predominantly white institution. Mm-hmm. And actually, when I was there, the school population was 3% Black, which is very similar to the field of speech pathology, which is 3.6% Black. And it's about 8 to 10% people of color in general. But my experience in undergrad, I was like, wow, it was not fun. It was honestly probably the hardest 4 years of my life. Mm-hmm. But I just learned so much. I learned how to stand up for things I believed in. I learned what was important to me, what mattered to me, how to have a voice and use it to support others and create things that were bigger than me. And then for grad school, I went to Howard University,
Mhm.
which is a historically Black college or university. And it was the opposite experience. The first time I ever saw or met a Black speech language pathologist, and I was surrounded by them. I was learning from the best of them. I was on campus with future Black doctors and dentists and lawyers and
Mm.
politicians, and it changed my life. And it really just shaped like, wow, I could do and be anything. And it was the first time I was known for just being myself. Growing up, I played basketball. And I was the only Black person in a lot of spaces. So I was just known as, oh, the little Black girl that plays basketball. I was
Mm.
never known for like being Jordyn or, like what I bring to the table. So that was my experience when I went to Howard. So all these things just like really shaped how I view the world and how I know people
Mm.
view me, and like how I want to show up.
Mm.
So after Howard, I started my social media journey, which is how I became, known in my business and everything, because I just wanted people to see me. I just wanted people to see a Black SLP. I wanted to be the representation that I needed. I understood how much representation mattered, and so that's how I got to where I am today.
Mm. It's interesting, as you describe your journey, how so many different ways a person can feel othered, in a sense. And we have so many terms for that. Unfortunately, though, many of them have a negative connotation, like feeling marginalized, feeling othered.
Hmm.
And I experienced that because my mother died when I was young. And I was the
Yep.
only kid I knew who didn't have a mother. And it when it allows us to really understand what that experience is, and then support, almost by definition, children who are different in some
Yeah.
ways, especially in communication, it leads to a very different experience of, okay, I've kind of walked in those shoes a little bit in some parts of my life. But then you had the contrast with going to Howard. That's quite amazing.
Yeah.
So much of what you're known for in your work, I guess, falls under that category of intersectionality. So, could you kind of summarize what that means to you and why it's important?
Yeah. So intersectionality, the term was created by Kimberly Crenshaw because she was like in the court systems and seeing how Black women were being treated differently than Black men, and Black men were being treated differently than white men, and Black women were being treated differently than white women. So she was like, there needs to be a term to understand what's happening here. Like all these people are being perceived differently, treated differently based on their different identities. And so she created the term intersectionality. And so for me, it's just like the idea that you have all these different overlapping things that make you who you are as a person. And
Mhm.
you cannot remove any of these identities that you have to become somebody else or to just like leave that identity at the door. These identities are always who you are. And it's things like race, ethnicity, financial status, gender, sexuality, education, all these different things that make us who we are. And so when we think about like ability, disability, race, and body type, like all these things can make you more or less marginalized, have more
Mhm.
power or have less power. But everybody has a balance of both. Like you were talking about, like you, technically, you are a white man. Like you are like the epitome of privilege. But then you throw in your other identity of like, man, my mom died when I was super young. I didn't have a mother. I didn't have that figure in my life that really shapes who you are as a person. And
Mhm.
so you have both sides. Like, yeah, I have this privilege on this side, but I also have like I had way less power, or I felt oppressed, or I felt othered or marginalized because of this other identity that I have. So it's just the idea that all these different things make us who we are, and we can't separate them from anybody. And so going into different experiences with other people, like I have no idea what shapes this person or all these different identities that they have, but I know they're all important to that person.
Hmm. And it shapes how people look at us in terms of what they
Mhm.
impose on us. And you gave a perfect example of that when you said that when you were at an almost all white school, you were the little Black girl who played basketball. I think you said it something like that.
Yeah.
But when you went to Howard, you were Jordyn.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, and it's interesting too, Jordan, that everything you're describing, none of these things are things that individuals choose. So it's like
Yeah.
our the way that we're perceived. I had no choice over my socioeconomic status. Had no choice over whether or not I would go bald at age 25. All these things, the way that people, see you,
Yeah.
it's like, okay. And that's where it becomes, I think, so challenging, is because as the perceiver, we forget sometimes that, like, oh, this person didn't choose to be born into a wealthy family. This person didn't choose to lose their mom at a young age.
It's so
But
true.
it definitely shapes who you are.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think another great point you made is like it changes as you get older. It changes as you
Mm.
age. Like you weren't thinking about going bald when you were a teen and like you still had all the other identities that you have, but now, okay, this other one of how people are going to perceive this, like that is now added on to my identity and people like gain or lose weight. People become physically disabled or people become sick. Like all these different things can change how you perceive yourself and how other people perceive you.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
that becomes really important with, like, late diagnosed, autistic people,
Exactly.
and that sort of thing. So it's very interesting.
Hmm.
Mhm. So a big part of your work, I guess, falls under the term being culturally responsive. And I guess we could go both ways on this. How can we, as for our listeners who are professionals, be culturally responsive? But you also talk about the importance of self-awareness of your own history. Um, and so why don't we talk about that a little bit in terms of how those perceptions impact the families we serve, the individuals with disabilities that we serve? What kind of
Yeah.
lens does that require us to have?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think self-awareness and being culturally responsive go hand in hand because you can't be culturally responsive if you're not self-aware, if you don't, reflect on things that you believe, why you believe the things that you do, how you grew up, what your own culture is, because we all have a culture, even if it's the dominant culture, we all have one, or we all have our family culture, different traditions. So I think being able to look within yourself is very important just to become a better therapist.
Hmm.
Just to identify like what are my strengths? How do people think about me when I step into the room? How does that perception change the way that people might interact with me? These are all things that I think are very important to consider as somebody who works with people. One tool I like to talk about often is called the wheel of power and privilege. And it
Hmm.
goes through those different identities. And you might like mark, okay, I'm on this level, I'm on the outside of the circle here, so I'm more marginalized. But on this side, I'm like right in the middle of the circle. So I have a lot of power here. And with SLPs, that might be we're all very educated. We all have a good career. We are in a position of power when we're going in to work with a patient because they're coming to us for help. So keeping that in mind of, okay, I'm in a position of power. I need to make sure I'm using it ethically. I need to make sure I'm responsible and, put thought into what I'm doing with this individual. And that's really the biggest thing about being culturally responsive is it's individualized. You're just responding to the room. And that's why I like to call it being culturally responsive. I know cultural humility is another really popular term, and
Hmm.
they're very similar. I just like to use responsive because I think it's like it's an action. I'm continuing to learn. I'm still aware of the different identities that are coming into the room, that are in the community that I'm around, just responding to things that are happening in the world. Like if I know I work with a lot of immigrant families, my sessions might look different with the things that are happening in the community. I might lean towards like, okay, I want to be more nurturing and caring, or make sure that we're play based today versus drill based because they might be having a hard time at home. Like that's what it means to be responsive. I also think it's very important just to ask questions and not be afraid to make mistakes. I think
Hmm.
that's where people, are scared. They don't want to offend somebody. They don't want to come off the wrong way, which I understand. However, I also think that in itself is a form of othering because if that person was similar to you, you wouldn't feel that way. And
Yes. Sorry.
you get it right. No, you got it. I actually have a really recent example of this. I
Hmm.
actually work in a private school. I work across multiple schools. I'm at this school once or twice a week, and I was in the building, and I they gave me like a visitor's badge, that's a sticker, and I had it on, but I had it under a cardigan. And so I was walking around and I was there a day I typically wasn't there. So I had to take my student back to another classroom. So I got turned around and somebody saw me and they're like, oh, do you need help finding where you're going? And I said, yeah, I'm just trying to get back downstairs. And she points me to the different stairs, the different elevators. I'm like, okay, thank you. I go down the elevator, go back to my office. Everything was fine. Like 2 weeks later, I go to the front office and somebody is like in a hushed tone, like, hey, did security speak with you? And I'm like, no, like, why would security need to speak with me? And she's like, oh, there was like an administrator and she saw you in the building a while ago and she didn't see your badge. And we just don't know, like, we don't know if you belong here and we don't know who you are. And she was just like, we went back to look at the cameras and we saw that it was you. And so I told her, like, no, she's supposed to be here, but she just really wanted me to tell you that you need to wear your badge. And we were supposed to, security was supposed to tell you, but I'll just let you know. And so, of course, I'm like, okay, it's fine. Like, I understand it's a school. You want to be safe. You want to wear a badge. Like, I get that. And so I let her know, like, yeah, I had it on. It's probably just covered, moved on with my day. But of course, I think this is the biggest point of microaggressions is like you just think about it constantly. Like if that was somebody else, would she have treated me that way? Would they go back and look at security cameras? Why didn't she just ask me who I was when she saw me? And then so many people, because I posted about this, so many people were like, maybe she didn't want to come off offensive and ask you where your badge was. But I'm like, if it was a white woman, I don't think she would have been hesitant to ask. I think she would have just asked me instead of going the roundabout way of handling that situation.
Yeah, I mean, and especially if the, safety, of course, is at stake. So you give someone the benefit of the doubt. You say, oh, well, they were just, but that's not exactly being protective of safety when you don't even have the courage to ask, hey, even though we don't look alike, I need to see your badge, right? Like, and I think that's the reason I jumped in and said yes so loud is because but like you, Barry and I both do a good amount of public speaking. And one of the things that usually comes up is I will try to force the issue sometimes during a Q&A session. People are hesitant to even ask questions or have a dialogue because they're afraid. For just for one example, if I were to say autistic person or person with autism, whatever I end up saying, it's going to be wrong for half the room, right? And so then you start tiptoeing around and you avoid having the real conversation that can actually move the needle and result in progress, even if it looks messy for, a few exchanges of the dialogue. To not have that dialogue because you're afraid of offending someone and because it's such loaded terrain, well, then nothing changes. So it's, but in your case, the stakes are that much higher because, you're entering a school. And the funny thing is you were wearing your badge.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. But no, you're right. I think people are scared to make mistakes. And I think that's one of my biggest pillars of being culture responsive is kind of remove yourself from the situation. Like, don't make it like, oh, I'm going to offend. I'm going to feel so bad. Oh, I feel guilty. Don't make it about that. Make it about like, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. I want to make sure that what you prefer is what I'm saying. So I'm going to ask questions or I'm going to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm going to make sure I know about your background and history because it's important and it all informs your communication. It's all connected.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that is such an issue. And Dave was alluding to this about identity first versus person first language. Yeah. And, after probably a few years of debates and what's allowable and what's insulting and on and on and on, people just finally came to the conclusion that if the person is capable of responding to you, to the question, ask them.
Exactly.
It's that simple. The whole issue of cultural responsiveness, I think, is a fascinating one. When you talk about disability as having its own culture, and something you're probably very familiar with is that many autistic people are saying that what has been pathologized in their communication style is autistic communication. Yeah. We have our own style. We will info dump. And we will have to approach this very directly, and as opposed to dancing around a sensitive issue that you might be sensitive about. So I think that's another important dimension, trying to understand, and not just ethnic and not just racial aspects of culture, and your
Yeah.
own cultural heritage, but the fact that disability in and of itself presents it. So I guess obviously it's most clear and probably earliest put out there by the hearing impaired deaf population. But
Yeah.
now I think we're seeing it more and more in other quote unquote neurodivergent populations.
Yeah, because it's so true. I mean, there's so many different types of culture. And it's like you said, like obviously race and ethnicity are talked about heavily, but there's so many other things that influence who we are. Disability culture is huge. Even if we just talk about like regional cultures, like I'm from California, I'm from the West Coast. My husband is from New Jersey, he's from the East Coast. We grew up so differently. And we have
Hmm.
similar cultures, obviously, but there's so much influence in just where you're at. Like, again, like Dave said, not where you chose, but just like where you happen to grow up influences who you are. Your abilities or disabilities influence your entire life, and that's your culture.
Hmm.
So I think just being able to consider that about people, and like you said, just asking the questions, especially with the autistic communication, there's times I'll ask parents, I don't follow any type of like guidebook or script. I ask my parents, or I ask my clients specifically, what is important to you? Like, what do you want to be able to do? What does your day look like? What are the pain points? And how can we create goals to fix those pain points? Not to fix how he communicates or not to change anything about him, but like we want, like, I feel like the goal of speech pathology is to improve your life, like improve quality of life.
Hmm.
So how can we work together to improve your quality of life? And that's it.
Hmm. Crucial, absolutely. And
Hmm.
that leads me to ask you a little bit about and have you share your wisdom about engaging with families. I know it's a big part of what you do. It's a big part of what I've always done. And when I say engaging, that is as much, and you just alluded to this, as much learning from as it is supporting. So
Yeah.
why don't we talk a little bit about that kind of piece of intersectionality here, engaging with families, and then now, especially in the last decade or two, we have many parents who are parent professionals, many of whom have gone back for degrees, and they come in to situations wearing kind of a hat of a different shape and color than parents who don't have that background. So I'm just curious about your experiences and your feelings about that piece.
Yeah. I think my biggest thing with communicating with families, again, is being responsive. And I think my perception has changed a lot since I've started going into homes more consistently and
Hmm.
working so closely with families. Is my job is not like, again, removing myself from the situation. It's not about me at all. It's like, how can I help this family? How can I help this first time parents who are stressed, they're anxious, they don't know what to expect, they feel like they're doing something wrong, they feel like they're behind. And my goal, and I feel like a lot of what we do is counseling. It's providing information. It's letting them know, like, you didn't do anything wrong. This is what I'm seeing. These are the issues that you're having. Let's come together and figure out what can we do together.
Hmm.
And I think it's tough in the schools to do that because you don't have as much contact with families and parents. But I think it's still really important to do what you can to build relationship with those parents. Even if you don't get a lot of contact, make sure those contacts that you do have are positive experiences. A lot of times, people are coming into these situations, again, anxious and afraid, not knowing what's going on, don't have access to the information that we do. I think a lot of times we forget that what we do is not common sense. So, being able to break down the strategies that we're using, or things that we're noticing, or recommendations that they can use at home in a way that they can understand it, and using quote unquote layman's terms,
Hmm.
talking about things that they can easily implement into their routines because families
Hmm.
have different time. They have different access to time. One of the terms I like to talk about a lot is time poverty, because
Hmm.
we talk about finances and like what that means and not having the ability to purchase the things that you need to survive. But we also have time poverty where instead of coming home, cooking dinner, working on homework with your kids, you're coming home, pulling some food out the freezer, hopefully, and then going to your second job. Like you don't have time to sit and read with your kids. You don't have time to sit and make sure their homework is done or their lunch is packed for tomorrow because I have to prioritize making sure they have food in their stomachs.
Hmm.
So that is what's most important at the time. So just being understanding of people have different situations, and it's not my place to come in and judge. It's my place to come in and improve quality of life. And how can I do that with this specific family or this specific client?
Hmm.
And again, time poverty, not someone's choice. You'll get
Exactly.
some cynical psychopath in Washington who says, "Oh, well, if you made better, blah, 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 blah." And these are the same people who are born with a silver spoon in their mouth, who
Yeah.
are backed by billionaires. So, time poverty, not someone's choice. Possibly, I don't. I don't want to say intellectual poverty, but again, we can go back to Washington if I'm going to point to intellectual poverty. But some
Yeah.
families, or even empathic, some families are just not emotionally, or the parents don't agree on even whether or not the child should be uh,
Absolutely.
labeled in a certain way that would avail
Hmm.
themselves of certain services, right? And to give themselves a leg up. So um, that's something that the family didn't choose, right? That just
Yeah.
is how
Hmm.
the person was wired, dad versus mom. And so, yeah, your job is I never thought of it this way. Your job is very much to meet them where they're at, not to come
Hmm.
in with this big SLP agenda and say, like, this is how
Mhm.
SLP works for literally every
Hmm.
client.
Yeah. This
It's
is
okay.
how I do my job, but your
Right.
job is to help me.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
You know,
rest
Yeah.
assured, I am definitely helpful. Yes.
Exactly.
yeah, the time poverty piece is really such a crucial piece because once again, if we want to be kind of, a little bit more of an empathic professional, we want to think about the guilt that causes for many, many parents. I
Yes.
mean, we've been doing a parent retreat weekend for 28 years, and what the parents come up over and over again is that feeling of, am I doing enough? I don't
Yeah.
feel like I'm doing enough. But it's just not possible in life sometimes
Yeah.
to have that standard that you set for yourself about doing and what people tell you is enough to do. It's
Yeah.
absolutely crucial.
And
Yeah.
we've heard, I mean, I know, I'm sure both of you have heard, other professionals talk about parents like, oh, these parents never show up. These parents never answer the phone. These parents don't care. Like, how many parents do you know that actually don't care about their children? Like 99 times out of 100, that's not the case. It's not that they just don't care, don't want to show up. Like, they have other things that they have to do,
Yes.
whether they want to or not. So it's our job to care and it's our job to show up and ask questions and do what we can to support.
Yeah. That's what family-centered practice is. I mean, we have to
Exactly.
really understand and respect, and something you just said, be non-judgmental
Hmm.
on so many levels, as far as cultural differences, everything having to do with, kind of meal practices in the home, the
Yeah.
routines, everything, and just be respectful of that. It's so
Yeah.
important. I personally, I feel, and I've said this many times before, that the worst thing we could do is challenge a parent's intuitions about their child
Yep.
and challenge the way that their family moves through their journey in life,
Mm.
uh, because then trust is shattered.
Yep.
You're
I mean, I
judging me.
tell families all the time, like, you're the expert on your child. I don't, this is my first time meeting them. I'm an expert in what I went to school for. I don't know your child from anybody else. And so it's my job to get to know them and get to know you as a family and figure out again how I can support. But you are the expert on them. And just giving parents and families back that agency because again, we're coming in with an imbalance of power. And I want to come in and balance that out. Like I don't know better than you do. I have my skills that I'm bringing to the table to try to help you, but you know your child best. And so that's why I want to learn from you. And I think Dave, you had a great point about how there's still so much stigma in a lot of cultures and a lot of families of I don't want that label, or I don't want my kid to do
Hmm.
that, or I don't want them to whatever it is. I don't want them to use this device. And it's my job to provide the information as what I'm the expert in. I'm the expert in communication. This is what the research says. This is what my opinion is. I hear what your goal is and I hear what you think. So let's figure out, okay, how can we meet in the middle?
Hmm.
And I think there's so much, like you said, the SLP agenda. Like we have the idea of what's right, and this is the way communication is supposed to be, but it's not because communication looks different for every culture, for every family. And so we have to keep that in mind when we go into that room.
And also not jumping to assumptions. We talk about looking for the deep why for kids. From their experience, what are they experiencing? But we should think about the deep why for parents as well.
Yes.
So if you recommend an AAC system, or at least an AAC system, even if the child is learning to speak, and the parent says, "No, I don't want that. I don't want that," and some people will jump to the assumption they just don't want to help their kid. But it might be that they've heard over and over again that somehow that prevents speech, which is
Exactly.
inaccurate. uh,
Exactly.
and so I guess it's a matter of respect rather than judging, trying to really understand the parent's reasoning and perspective and have a good conversation about that.
Yeah, and I think it
So,
goes back to building relationships. Like, I've had that. I've had those tough conversations where, okay, I don't think this family is ready to hear this at this in our first session. I don't think they're ready to hear that. I'm going to be bringing an AAC device in. Like that's going to happen, but we're going to get there as a team. Like so these first 3 sessions, I'm staying after for 10 minutes. I'm talking to the parents. I'm getting to know them. I'm helping them understand like this is what I do and have you heard of AAC devices? I know this is what people say, but this is what the research says and I'm thinking about it, just so like here's some information if you want to consider it and I know you know me and I know I want what's best and we're on the same page. And so when we get to that point, they're like, "Yes, like yeah, Miss Jordyn, if you think it's going to work, then I'm going to do it." Because we spent so much time making sure we understand that we are on the same team with the same
Hmm.
goals and I have this education and I want to use it to help you. And so this is what I know from my education. And this is some information if you want to take your time to read it because it might be a lot to just listen to what I'm saying and process
Hmm.
that information. So I'm going to leave it with you. Reach out if you have any questions, and I'm going to bring it up again in the next session. Like, hey, I was thinking about this app maybe I was looking into. Here's some more information if you want to think about it. Just giving them opportunities to warm up to it and not feel judged or forced into doing something.
Hmm.
you know, can I ask an outsider's question? Speaking of being othered, and by the way, this is total privilege. I get to have my name on a podcast, and I have no subject matter expertise whatsoever. So if we're talking privilege, ding, ding, ding.
Right. Right. You bring other expertise though.
Exactly.
Sure, yeah, we'll go with that. Wise crackery. Um, so I guess from the outside question, and I'm asking this almost on behalf of the parents who are listening as well. What you just described, Jordyn, sounds so reasonable and practical and efficient and so important to not creating problems that don't need to exist by coming in with an agenda, blah blah blah, or a script. And so, uh, is is SLP training? Obviously, every school is going to be different. Every professor is going to be different. Every ideology on this is going to be different. But um, is the emphasis when if I'm an SLP newly minted in my career, was the emphasis during my education on this is how you SLP, or was it on meet the family where they're at, and these are the tools that you can use selectively? Like what can parents expect from an SLP these days?
That is a great question. And I think it's changed. Yeah, over time, I think grad school, becoming an SLP has changed. But I think that is a really big gripe in the SLP grad school world is we're not taught how to do the job. Like a lot of
Hmm.
times you learn how to do the job in like your externship experiences where you're learning under a supervisor and that varies because supervisors vary. I was blessed. I had amazing supervisors. Shout out to them. But everybody does not have that same experience. When you're in class, like your courses are mostly theory. So you're learning about anatomy, you're learning about different communication disorders, you're learning about how they might present. But it's hard to have like a really, this is how you do therapy. There's literally a book called This Is How You Do Therapy for speech therapists. And I have it because one of my, because that's like, it's a huge conversation, honestly. It's a huge conversation because it really is so dependent on those externship supervisory experiences of like, these are my therapy practices. And so you're learning from these different people, but that varies based on your program because some programs have maybe two of those experiences total throughout the entire program. My program, we had 6 to 8. So it's a
Wow.
really big difference. We have a lot more influence. Like, I feel like I talk about this all the time. I took something from all of my supervisors that made me the clinician I am. So if
Yep.
I only had, two of those experiences, like I would feel like I was lacking.
Sure.
So there is kind of a wide variety, but one of the best things about speech pathology is there is continuing education. So people are
Yeah.
forced, it's mandatory that you're continuing to learn. And there's a lot, once you get out of grad school, there's a lot more of those niche classes of like, how do we have these conversations with parents or, various specialties, things like that.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Thanks. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Jordyn, I've also heard you speak on a related topic, and it really has to do with what you just mentioned about getting those varied experiences with good supervisors. But at a different level, I've heard you speak about, and I'm sure it still happens, but university faculty who teach courses and probably have not spent more than 15, 20 minutes with a child with a disability on the floor with
Yes.
them in like forever. Um, and then there's this big gap between what they're taking away from their classes on supporting children and people with disabilities and what then happens in the real world. Do you want to
Yes.
expand upon that a little bit and how that it's almost a crime
Yeah.
because you're getting just contextless information in many cases as opposed to something that will help you.
Absolutely. Another gripe. Another one of my gripes for sure. I think it's really frustrating, especially when you're in grad school or even in undergrad in your major. You don't really realize that, like, oh, these people haven't been in a therapy session in like decades. Like you're like, oh, I'm learning from the best. I'm learning from somebody who knows exactly what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. And then you get into the real world and you're like, they actually had no idea. I feel like academia, like you're talking about, is so separate from practice. And I think there are a lot of people are trying to fix that gap or trying to make that period of research to practice shorter. I feel like I've seen it get smaller because of social media. Like people are sharing new information, new research much faster.
Hmm.
Another really great company or organization, the Informed SLP, they do a great job of sharing new research. So that's like, if you're not familiar, this is not an ad either. I'm just a fan.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay. The Informed SLP, they're like a subscription-based company where they take all this new research pretty much daily and summarize it and have people do like either short like audio clips or podcasts or like articles where they're getting new research to put into practice immediately.
Hmm.
So they're doing a really great job of closing that gap too. Another thing I talk about is again, supervisors, we such an important position. We are working hand in hand with students who are in the classroom, who are doing research. We should be learning from each other. Like they are getting the most up to date information in the classroom as far as research goes. So if I'm an SLP working in school, I would be asking my student like, "Hey, what are you learning in class about X, Y, and Z? Let's go over your notes because I have a student that's doing this, and like that's just a way to close that gap, just to share that information." But I think so many SLPs feel like, I'm the SLP. I'm in charge. You should be learning from me. It shouldn't go the other way. But I feel like it needs to go both ways. And I feel like that would change that gap.
Yeah, because then you're more an extension of the family and not, a friction point for the family.
Yeah,
Hmm.
ideally.
Yes. So I think it's important to get back to the intersectionality issue and how that kind of impacts serving kids of color. And especially when we talk about neurodivergent kids, kids on the autism spectrum who are so misunderstood anyway, in many cases. Um,
Hmm.
so, do you feel that students and young kids of color are impacted differently and maybe served or looked at differently uh, because they look different to many mainstream white professionals?
Yeah.
I know that that's been an issue for a long time around diagnosis. That typically kids of color will be more likely to get a diagnosis of emotional behavioral disorder when the
Hmm.
accurate diagnosis would be autism spectrum or ADHD or something along those lines. So your experience, I mean, you're out there.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I remember my CF year, like first year into the field. I was in Washington, D.C., public schools, predominantly black, and I had never seen so many kids with an ED, emotional disturbance diagnosis. And this is just before I even met the kids. I'm just, reviewing the IEPs that I got. And I'm like, they can't all be like they can't all have this same diagnosis. That's crazy. That doesn't even make sense. And then I meet the kids finally, and I'm like, no, absolutely not. Like, absolutely not. I obviously can't give that diagnosis, but that's
Hmm.
not what this is. And that's
Hmm.
not what's happening. And I think it happens for a lot of reasons. One article I read about this stuck with me because it said it's not just that they're getting the wrong diagnosis, they're misdiagnosed with an emotional or behavioral disorder. On top of that, because they have that first disorder, nobody's looking any further.
Hmm.
Nobody's going to do any more assessments to say, is there a learning disability? Could they be neurodivergent? Is there anything else going on here? Because everything is just chalked up to no, they're just a behavior issue. No,
Hmm.
it's just ED. So they don't get the support. And black students or black kids in general, are the most underdiagnosed and the most misdiagnosed.
Hmm.
So we know the importance of, early identification or early intervention. We know how important those first 5 years are. When most black kids who are autistic or have an ADHD diagnosis don't get that diagnosis until somewhere between like around 8 years old. And that's also after they've brought up concerns at least 3 times to 3 different professionals. So it takes longer, they're not heard, and they miss those prime years of intervention. And then if you think about just being in the school, if you are neurodivergent, you're just neurodivergent, regardless of race, you're 2 times more likely to be suspended,
Hmm.
2 times more likely to have that consequence. If you are black, you're 3 times more likely to be suspended. So imagine you're going to talk about intersectionality. If you are both black and neurodivergent, you're at least 6 times more likely to be suspended for the same things that a
Hmm.
white peer is doing and
Hmm.
get a completely different consequence just because of your intersectional identities. So it is a huge impact. And then most importantly, and we're talking about safety, because those same kids, black kids, are more likely to be pulled over, more likely to be harmed or killed by the police. So are autistic kids or anybody who's neurodivergent. You're more likely to have an interaction with the cop. So if you're already more likely to have an interaction because you're autistic, and then you add race on top of that, when you're more likely to be harmed or killed,
Yeah.
there are so many of those stories. Just the other day, I heard a story of he was an Afro Latino. I'm not going to remember his name, but he eloped. He is a teen. He eloped from the house. Parents called for support. They have spoken with this police department before. The police department knew this kid. They're like, hey, he ran out. We're just trying to find him and bring him back. He got shot six
Yeah.
times. 6 times he got shot because the police claimed that he was coming into, like, police was in the car, shot from the car, and the police claimed that the kid was coming into the street to attack him when it was later proven that he never even left the sidewalk.
Mm.
So like these things happen and they're scary, and they are like, it's dangerous to to have these identities that you didn't choose. And so
Hmm.
I think for us as professionals, it's so important just to be aware of these things and spread the word about being racially I don't even know what the term I want to use is, but just being aware of what other people are facing and using your privilege for good in those situations if you can when they come up.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, there's the formal sort of systemic way to go about it, which is very slow change, and it's talking to first responders, and it's legislation, and it's educating school districts, and then there's the uh, pounding the pavement, where it's
Yeah.
like the incident. I mean, that's absolutely disgusting and tragic. What you just described happens more often than just an isolated incident here and there. And then also, that's a first responder. That's a cop. So we're not even talking about sort of the self-appointed neighborhood security officer who's just a very trigger happy
Hmm.
neighbor. So it really is. It has to be like a grassroots, community level change, but it also has to happen systemically, and that takes a lot of voice and a lot of critical mass
Yeah.
and
and
consistency.
and learning from people who've experienced it themselves. So, just a few episodes ago, I'm going to give a little plug going back on our podcast. We interviewed Saulo Barbosa, who is a Brazilian autistic policeman,
Oh, wow.
and who currently, as we speak, goes around Brazil, and he's in big demand now in terms of doing trainings for police officers about what it feels like and means like to be autistic. And Dave doesn't know this, but I just got an email from him yesterday, and now the Army is asking him to do trainings um, about, understanding, not only understanding what an autistic person or neurodivergent person in crisis might look like, but how to approach that person, even if it takes longer, in a way that, we throw around the term de-escalation a lot, but in a way that
Hmm.
really prevents more gasoline being thrown on the fire. And he's having a big impact now and is in demand in doing that. And he never thought that would be a part of his life. He just discovered that a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So,
Godspeed. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's
So
so important to learn from those people.
it's absolutely essential. It's so important. I mean, I think we're all learning more and more and more about learning from the neurodivergent community, and not just learning, embracing and changing our
Yeah.
unfortunate assumptions sometimes that leads to problems. So
Yeah.
I guess in the big picture, what is your vision for embracing neurodiversity and intersectionality? And it sounds like we're moving a bit in the right direction, but how can we accelerate that?
Yeah, I think we are. And I think having conversations like this, where we're talking to professionals and to the neurodivergent community about their experiences, is how we're going to learn from them. I think a lot of, recently the neurodivergent community has had so much to say about the treatment that they went through,
Hmm.
growing up, whether it was like therapy services or things that happened at school. And I've learned so much just from people sharing their own experiences that I really hope people continue to do so. Because we won't know how it is until somebody tells us. And I think that's the best way to make a change or make a difference. You can't do it if you're not aware. So just becoming aware of what's wrong, and then when you know better, do better. If you know that
Mm.
you're being harmful, choose not to be harmful anymore. Choose to do no harm. And I think that is kind of my biggest thing with being culturally responsive is you've learned, you've understood your own culture. Now you're learning about other people's cultures and you're continuing to learn. But along with that process is making changes based on the information, that you've received. Like, okay, now I'm not going to ask this specific question anymore, or I'm going to take this material out that always ask, or one question that comes up a lot in like speech therapy materials is who keeps us safe, and it's the police officer. It's like
Uh,
I might not show that one. I might not,
no,
just like
no.
taking being aware of the materials that we're using, who we're working with, and how they're going to be impacted by it.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
how do you say to a young child, yeah, police officer, but only if he or she has had the right training?
Yeah,
I know.
exactly.
Again, depending on which elementary school you went to, the
Yeah,
police officers are, framed as heroes or
yeah.
different reality for many
Eh,
communities.
could go either way for sure. So yeah, I think big picture, I would love for people to just accept that everybody's different. Like there's no such thing as normal. There's no such thing as like everybody should be this way. Like that's like my biggest pet peeve. I don't think anybody should be exactly one thing. I think we
Hmm.
all have so many different identities that make us who we are. And I think the world needs to do a better job of just embracing everybody for what they are and what they bring to the table instead of trying to force them to be something that they're not. We could be
Hmm.
using their strengths. We could be using, what they can give us for bettering the world in some form or some shape or fashion. So yeah, that's my
Yeah.
biggest thing.
Yeah. Be curious rather than judgmental.
Hmm.
Learn. Right.
Yeah.
Jordyn, this has been terrific. And I think that our listeners, because our listeners, really are the full range of parents, neurodivergent people, teachers, SLPs. Um, but we can not talk enough about this. It's just so
Yeah.
important in terms of increasing our awareness and increasing our ability to look at our own biases and our own judgments. So important.
Yes. Thank you. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. And I hope you all take something from it.
Oh,
Yes.
for sure. Well, thank you for being on.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
All
Thanks,
righty.
Jordyn.
Take care, Jordan.